what is this supposed to be, huh?
That's my military ID and my orders. I'm active duty.
Anybody can buy a uniform.
Sir, I'm telling
Turn around. Got his arm. I'm not resisting. I'm not resisting.
You quit shifting on me.
I'm lying still.
You're on my shoulder.
Dispatch units to Concourse B. Copy.
My ID is real.
Senior Chief Malik Rowan, U.S. Navy. 11 deployments.
We'll figure that out. I'm cooperating.
Attention.
At 7:41 a.m. inside Clearwater International Airport in southern Texas, two airport police officers forced a black man in full U.S. Navy dress uniform face first onto the terminal floor. The impact echoed across the concourse. Passengers slowed. A rolling suitcase tipped over. Someone near the coffee stand raised a phone instinctively, unsure whether they were witnessing a routine detention or something that had just crossed a line. The man on the floor was Senior Chief Daniel Cross, an active-duty member of U.S. Naval Special Operations with nearly 17 years of service. His uniform was regulation dress blues, gold buttons, service ribbons. Rank insignia clearly visible. A garment bag lay a few feet away, partially unzipped. One officer drove a knee into Cross's upper back. The other pulled his arms behind him, forcing his wrists together. The senior chief did not swing. He did not shout. His cheek pressed against the tile as he repeated the same words evenly through controlled breaths. "I'm not resisting." The officers involved were Officer Ryan Bell, age 42, and Officer Mark Delaney, age 31, both assigned to Clearwater Airport Police. Body cameras were active. Terminal security cameras were recording from at least 4 angles. Bell, the senior officer, had already made up his mind. On audio later reviewed by investigators, Bell could be heard saying, "That uniform doesn't mean anything. People fake that stuff all the time." The stop had begun less than 3 minutes earlier. Cross had been walking toward his gate after clearing security, moving with purpose but not urgency. He was traveling on official orders to attend a closed briefing at a naval command facility in Hampton Roads, following a memorial service for a fallen teammate the previous evening. He remained in uniform because he was traveling directly between commands, a common and permitted practice. Bell noticed him near a departure board. Witnesses later described the moment Bell shifted his stance and stepped into Cross's path. "Hey, you in the uniform, stop." Cross complied immediately. Bell asked where he was coming from, asked for his bag, asked if he had identification. The questions came fast. The tone was sharp. When Cross explained he was active duty and reached slowly for his military ID, Bell ordered his hands back into view and told him not to get smart. Delaney moved to Cross's side, cutting off his forward path. Within seconds, the interaction escalated from questioning to physical control. When Cross asked why he was being detained, Bell told him to turn around. When Cross hesitated long enough to ask for a reason, Bell took hold of his arm. What followed happened quickly and publicly. A shove, a stumble, then force. The moment Cross hit the floor, several passengers shouted. One woman with a stroller stopped completely. A man wearing a veteran's cap stepped forward before stopping himself, phone already recording. Bell ordered Cross to stop moving. Cross replied that he was lying still. Bell said he was tensing up. Delaney radioed dispatch requesting units to Concourse C less than 10 minutes after Cross entered the terminal that morning. He was cuffed, pinned, and surrounded by cameras, civilian and police alike. By 7:55 a.m., airport supervisors were being alerted. By 8:02 a.m., the first internal messages were sent flagging a use of force incident involving a military traveler. And by 8:09 a.m., a phone inside a federal command office hundreds of miles away began to ring. At that moment, the incident on the floor of Clearwater International Airport was no longer just an airport police matter. It was the beginning of a chain reaction neither officer had anticipated, one that would soon involve military command structures, federal investigators, and consequences far beyond a single terminal. What happened next would depend entirely on what the cameras captured and who was willing to look at it. By 8:14 a.m., the initial internal report was already taking shape. According to the first account entered into the Clearwater Airport police system, officers Ryan Bell and Mark Delaney had identified a suspicious individual, wearing what they believed could be a military uniform. The report stated the subject was evasive, argumentative, and failed to comply with verbal commands, necessitating a controlled takedown for officer safety. The language was clean, procedural, familiar. Bell wrote that the individual matched indicators from recent bulletins warning of impersonators, using stolen uniforms to bypass security or move contraband through transportation hubs. No specific bulletin number was cited. No immediate threat was described. By 8:22 a.m., that version of events had already been forwarded to airport police supervisors and logged for review. On the concourse floor, however, the situation looked very different. Senior Chief Daniel Cross was seated in a plastic chair near a service corridor, wrists uncuffed but still marked red. His dress blues showed scuffs at the knee and shoulder. An airport medic had checked him quickly, documenting minor abrasions and shoulder strain. Cross declined transport but requested the injuries be formally recorded. A uniformed supervisor, Sergeant Allison Moore, arrived after being pulled from another post. She listened as Bell summarized what happened, emphasizing Cross's tone and attitude. Delaney stood slightly behind him, nodding occasionally, saying little. When Moore asked to see the identification that had triggered the stop, Bell handed over Cross's military ID and folded travel orders. The documents were legitimate. They included a duty barcode, official routing, and a command contact number. The photograph matched Cross exactly. His rank, service number, and assignment aligned. Moore noticed something else immediately: the timestamps. Bell had reported that Cross refused to provide identification promptly. The body camera metadata showed otherwise. From the moment Bell asked for ID to the moment he placed his hands on Cross's arm, less than 12 seconds had passed. Moore asked Bell why force was used so quickly. Bell answered that Cross had challenged his authority. Moore looked at him for a moment longer than usual, then asked for the body camera footage. Bell hesitated. Only briefly, but long enough to be noticed. By 8:31 a.m., Moore had stepped aside with a tablet, reviewing the first minutes of footage while Delaney stood watch. She heard Bell's voice clearly: the skepticism, the comments about fake uniforms, the escalation. She also heard Cross's voice, calm, controlled, repeatedly stating compliance. Moore did not comment immediately. Instead, she keyed her radio and requested that Captain Jonathan Reyes, the on-duty operations commander, come to concourse C. Bell's posture shifted slightly at that request. Across the terminal, passengers who had witnessed the incident were still talking. Two had already submitted complaints at the airport information desk. One had emailed video footage directly to the airport authority's public address, attaching the subject line: "Officer slammed Navy serviceman to ground, video attached." At 8:44 a.m., Captain Reyes arrived. He watched the footage in silence. He replayed the moment where Bell said, "That uniform doesn't mean anything." He replayed the takedown. He replayed Cross saying, "I'm not resisting." When the video ended, Reyes asked one question: "Did either of you attempt to verify his ID before using force?" Bell answered carefully. "We intended to." Reyes nodded once, then turned to Moore. "Pull them off the floor, both of them." Bell stiffened. "Captain," Reyes cut him off. "Now." By 8:52 a.m., Officers Bell and Delaney had been relieved of active duty pending review. Their radios were logged. Their body cameras were secured. They were instructed not to discuss the incident with anyone except internal affairs. Cross was escorted to a quiet office near airport administration. He was offered water, a clean cloth, a chance to call his command. He made one call. At 9:01 a.m., a duty officer at Naval Special Operations Command answered. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When Cross ended the call, he sat back, hands folded, expression neutral. Captain Reyes did not yet know it. Neither did Bell or Delaney. But that single phone call ensured the incident would not remain an internal review for long. Within minutes, a parallel process had begun, one that did not answer to airport police, city attorneys, or local politics. It answered to federal authority. And once that machinery started moving, there would be no quiet resolution. At 9:18 a.m., the first external request arrived. It did not come through public affairs. It did not come from city leadership. It came through a secure federal liaison channel that Clearwater Airport Police almost never used. The message was brief and direct: preserve all video, radio traffic, and written reports related to the detention of Senior Chief Daniel Cross. No alterations, no deletions. Captain Jonathan Reyes read it twice before looking up from his desk. He already understood what it meant. Inside the administrative office, Senior Chief Cross sat alone, jacket folded neatly on the table in front of him. He had cleaned the blood from a small cut near his cheekbone, but the swelling along his jaw was becoming more visible. When Sergeant Allison Moore returned, Cross asked one question. "Has my command been notified?" Moore nodded. "Yes, sir, they're asking for everything." That included the body camera footage. By 9:32 a.m., a secure copy of Officer Bell's body cam had been uploaded and flagged. A second copy was pulled from Delaney's camera. A third came from terminal security, showing the takedown from behind a row of stanchions. When investigators reviewed the clips side by side, a pattern became impossible to ignore. The escalation was not reactive. It was anticipatory. Bell's tone shifted before Cross ever spoke back. The proximity, the hand placement, the choice to block movement, the decision to interpret a question as defiance. At 9:47 a.m., Internal Affairs formally opened a use of force investigation. At 9:51 a.m., that investigation was expanded to include potential bias indicators, a classification rarely used without significant cause. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Delaney sat in a separate room, staring at the table in front of him. He had not been placed under arrest. He had not been accused of anything yet, but the silence felt heavier than any shouting ever had. An investigator entered and asked him a simple question. "Why didn't you intervene?" Delaney hesitated. "I didn't think it was my call." The investigator wrote that down. Across the building, Officer Ryan Bell was growing restless. He paced, he complained that the situation was being exaggerated. He repeated the same phrase more than once. "I was doing my job." But when asked to explain what specific threat Cross posed, Bell's answers grew vague. He was getting smart. He didn't fit. Something was off. When pressed to clarify what exactly was off, Bell had no concrete answer. At 10:06 a.m., a call came in from Naval Special Operations Command Legal Affairs. They requested copies of the footage and written reports. They also requested the service records of the involved officers. That request alone elevated the incident beyond a standard review. By 10:21 a.m., a representative from NCIS joined the call. The tone changed immediately. This was no longer about policy compliance. It was about jurisdiction. NCIS requested witness information, including civilian bystanders who had recorded the incident. Airport administration was instructed to preserve Wi-Fi logs and security metadata to track the spread of video from the terminal. Within the hour, at least 3 recordings had already been shared externally. One clip, only 14 seconds long, showed Cross being driven to the floor while saying, "I'm not resisting." That clip reached an inbox in Washington before noon. Back in Clearwater, Captain Reyes reviewed Bell's personnel file more closely. He found prior complaints, none sustained, all dismissed as insufficient evidence. Allegations of aggressive questioning, disproportionate stops. Comments that were described as unprofessional but not actionable. Individually, they had gone nowhere. Together, they formed a pattern. At 11:02 a.m., Reyes made a decision. Bell and Delaney were placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Their service weapons were logged. Their access credentials were suspended. Bell reacted with disbelief. "This is because he's military," he said. Reyes corrected him. "No. This is because there are cameras." By 11:19 a.m., a preliminary summary had been forwarded to the city's legal department. By 11:34 a.m., a federal civil rights review was quietly added to the file. Senior Chief Cross was informed shortly after. He listened without visible reaction. "I want everything documented," he said. "That's all." What he did not say, but everyone in the room understood, was that documentation was now out of local hands. Once federal oversight entered the case, outcomes were no longer negotiable. They were inevitable. By early afternoon, the tone inside Clearwater Airport Police Headquarters had shifted from procedural to defensive. At 1:08 p.m., the city attorney's office requested a closed-door briefing. Present were Captain Jonathan Reyes, 2 internal affairs investigators, a representative from airport administration, and a federal liaison officer whose presence alone signaled how far the case had traveled. The message was blunt. This incident was no longer being evaluated solely as a use-of-force review. It was now being examined under federal civil rights statutes, with particular attention to racial profiling, unlawful detention, and excessive force against an active-duty service member. The body camera footage was central. Frame by frame, investigators mapped the encounter, the lack of a clearly articulated threat, the rapid escalation, the language used before any resistance occurred. The moment Bell decided to put hands on Cross, it was not defensible. Attempts to contextualize the stop using generalized bulletins about impersonation failed quickly. No active alert matching Cross's description existed that morning. No specific intelligence justified the level of suspicion. At 1:37 p.m., Internal Affairs issued a formal finding. Probable policy violations by Officer Ryan Bell, including failure to de-escalate, improper use of force, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Officer Mark Delaney was cited for failure to intervene. That finding triggered mandatory reporting to the State Law Enforcement Certification Board. Across the building, Bell was informed of the development. His response was immediate and angry. "They're hanging this on me," he said. "Because it looks bad," an investigator corrected him. "It looks bad because it is bad." Delaney, by contrast, said little. When told he was being cited for failure to intervene, he stared at the table and asked only one question. "Does that end my career?" No one answered directly. Meanwhile, Senior Chief Daniel Cross was escorted to a private office where he spoke with an NCIS agent via secure call. The agent's questions were precise and unemotional. Did you resist? No. Did you refuse lawful orders? No. Did either officer use language you perceived as racially biased? Yes, that answer was noted. At 2:11 p.m., NCIS formally requested custody of all original video files. Clearwater Airport Police complied. At 2:29 p.m., the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division notified city officials that a preliminary federal review had been opened. The implications were immediate. Any attempt to quietly discipline the officers or resolve the matter internally was no longer possible. Statements would be sworn, records subpoenaed, prior complaints re-examined. By 3:04 p.m., local leadership was briefed. The mayor's office was notified. Public Affairs was instructed to prepare a holding statement in anticipation of media inquiries. Inside his office, Captain Reyes reviewed Bell's file one final time. He noted the pattern he had missed before, the same language appearing across years of reports, the same justification for escalation, the same assumptions. Reyes understood something now that had not been clear earlier. This was not an isolated mistake. It was a culmination. At 3:42 p.m., Reyes signed the order placing Bell on unpaid suspension pending termination review. Delaney was suspended with pay pending certification board action. Both officers were ordered to surrender their credentials and were escorted from the building separately. As Bell walked out, he muttered to Delaney, "This never should have gone this far." Delaney did not respond. At 4:15 p.m., the first media inquiry arrived. A reporter had obtained a short clip of the takedown. No context, no names, just a black man in navy dress blues being forced to the floor while saying, "I'm not resisting." The clip was already spreading. By 5:00 p.m., federal investigators were en route. And by the end of the day, the incident that began as a routine stop in an airport terminal had become something far larger, a test of accountability, evidence, and whether institutional power would protect its own or confront what had been captured on camera. The collision was no longer theoretical. It was underway. The decisive shift came the following morning. At 8:06 a.m., federal investigators from NCIS and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division arrived at Clearwater International Airport together. They did not request cooperation, they expected it. Their first move was not interviews, it was records. They pulled every body camera file involving Officer Ryan Bell from the past 6 years, every stop report, every complaint, every internal memo that mentioned attitude, noncompliance, or matched indicators. When the files were laid out chronologically, a pattern emerged with unsettling clarity. Bell's use of force incidents were disproportionately tied to black travelers. His reports used the same language repeatedly: vague suspicion, perceived defiance, rapid escalation. In several cases, supervisors had questioned his tone. In none had discipline been sustained. One internal email from 3 years earlier stood out. A sergeant had written, "Bell tends to assume bad intent early. He needs coaching before this becomes a liability." The coaching never came. At 9:14 a.m., investigators interviewed Officer Mark Delaney again. This time, the questions were sharper. "Did you believe Senior Chief Cross posed a threat?" Delaney paused. "No, then why did you assist in the takedown?" "I didn't want to contradict my partner." That answer was documented. Across the hall, Bell's interview was going poorly. When shown the body camera footage frame by frame, Bell attempted to justify his actions using officer safety language. But when investigators asked him to identify the precise moment Cross became a threat, Bell pointed to a clip where Cross asked, "For what reason?" "That," Bell said. "That's when it changed." The investigator leaned forward. "So the threat was a question." Bell did not respond. At 10:02 a.m., investigators introduced civilian footage, a recording taken from behind a stanchion that clearly showed Bell's hand driving Cross forward before any resistance occurred. Bell watched silently. The investigator spoke again. "You described the subject as aggressive. This video contradicts that." Bell finally said he didn't belong. That statement ended the interview. By 11:30 a.m., investigators had reached a conclusion internally. This was not a split-second judgment error. It was bias-driven escalation supported by language, behavior, and history. Meanwhile, Senior Chief Daniel Cross gave a final sworn statement. He spoke calmly, without emotion. He explained why he did not resist even as force was applied. He explained that in his experience, resisting, even verbally, while black and in uniform could be reframed instantly as aggression. "I followed every command," he said, "because I knew the camera would matter more than my pain." That statement was forwarded directly to federal prosecutors. At 12:18 p.m., the Department of Justice formally notified city officials of its intent to pursue civil rights charges related to unlawful detention and excessive force. At 12:42 p.m., the State Law Enforcement Certification Board issued an emergency notice initiating decertification proceedings against Bell and Delaney. The language was unequivocal. Officer Bell was cited for racial discrimination, excessive force, and falsification by omission. Officer Delaney was cited for failure to intervene and aiding an unlawful detention. By early afternoon, the outcome was no longer speculative. Careers were ending. At 2:05 p.m., Bell was officially terminated. No press release, no ceremony, just paperwork and a signature. Delaney was dismissed later that day, pending final certification review. Inside Clearwater Airport Police Headquarters, the mood was grim. Supervisors avoided eye contact. Internal affairs investigators continued pulling files, aware that questions would soon be asked about who knew what and when. Captain Reyes understood that the damage was not limited to 2 officers. The department itself was now under scrutiny. What investigators had uncovered did not suggest an anomaly. It suggested tolerance. And tolerance, documented on paper and preserved on video, had consequences. By the 3rd day, the case had split into parallel tracks, and all of them were moving fast. At 7:22 a.m., subpoenas were issued. They went to the airport authority, to the city's legal office, to Clearwater Airport Police Headquarters. Investigators demanded full access to internal communications, disciplinary records, training logs, and supervisory reviews related not only to Officers Bell and Delaney, but to the chain of command above them. The question had shifted. This was no longer just what happened on the concourse floor. It was why nothing had stopped it before. Inside a federal building 2 time zones away, DOJ attorneys reviewed the compiled footage. One clip was played repeatedly, Bell's voice calm but dismissive, saying the uniform didn't mean anything, followed by the shove. A senior prosecutor paused the video. "That's the moment," she said. "That's intent." Back in Clearwater, Captain Jonathan Reyes was called into a second closed-door meeting, this time with federal investigators present. He was asked to explain prior complaints against Bell, why none had been sustained, and what corrective action had been taken. Reyes answered honestly. None. Supervisors had documented concerns but stopped short of discipline. Complaints had been labeled inconclusive. Bell's record had remained technically clean. The investigators exchanged glances. That answer carried weight. At 10:41 a.m., the Department of Justice formally notified the city of its intent to file a federal civil rights action unless an agreed resolution was reached. The notice outlined potential findings: unlawful detention, excessive force, racial discrimination, and failure of institutional oversight. The city's attorneys understood the implications immediately. This was no longer a case to fight. It was a case to contain. Meanwhile, Senior Chief Daniel Cross was back on base, having completed his required medical evaluation. Bruising had spread across his shoulder and upper back. His commanding officer had reviewed the footage personally. "You handled yourself exactly right," the commander told him. "This didn't escalate because of you, it escalated because of what was captured." Cross was asked whether he intended to pursue civil action. "Yes," he replied, "not for retaliation, for record." That distinction mattered. By 1:18 p.m., the city entered negotiations with federal attorneys. The goal was clear: avoid trial, acknowledge violations, and accept oversight in exchange for a settlement. The terms were strict: independent monitoring of the department, mandatory bias training, revised use of force policies, external review of all future airport police detentions for a fixed period, and accountability. At 2:47 p.m., formal termination notices were delivered again, this time with federal findings attached. Bell's decertification was expedited. Delaney's certification was suspended indefinitely. Neither officer appealed. They could not. The evidence was overwhelming. As negotiations continued, internal fallout spread. 2 supervisors who had previously dismissed complaints against Bell were placed under review. One requested early retirement. Another was reassigned pending outcome. By the end of the day, the department was operating under provisional leadership. The collision everyone had tried to avoid was now unavoidable. Federal authority had met local power, and local power had failed. The only question left was how publicly that failure would be recorded. The resolution came quietly, but it landed hard. 3 weeks after the incident at Clearwater International Airport, the Department of Justice finalized its findings. The conclusion was unambiguous. Senior Chief Daniel Cross had been unlawfully detained, subjected to excessive force, and targeted based on racial bias while fully compliant and traveling on official military orders. The evidence left no room for interpretation. Body camera footage, civilian recordings, radio logs, internal emails, prior complaints that had been dismissed, not disproven. Together, they formed a complete causal chain. Officer Ryan Bell was formally decertified by the State Law Enforcement Board. His termination for gross misconduct, civil rights violations, and falsification by omission was made permanent. He was barred from holding any law enforcement position in the state. His name was entered into a national database used by agencies to flag officers deemed unfit for service. No department appealed for him. Officer Mark Delaney lost his certification shortly afterward. Investigators concluded that his failure to intervene was not passive confusion, but a conscious decision to defer to authority despite recognizing the lack of threat. His career ended without ceremony, paperwork, revoked credentials, and a record that would follow him indefinitely. The consequences did not stop there. 2 supervisors were disciplined for prior inaction. 1 accepted early retirement under review. Another was demoted and removed from operational command. Clearwater Airport Police entered into a federal consent agreement mandating external oversight, revised detention protocols, and independent review of all use of force incidents for a minimum of 5 years. Civil court followed. Senior Chief Cross filed a federal civil rights lawsuit citing unlawful detention, excessive force, racial discrimination, and institutional failure. The case never went to trial. The city settled before discovery concluded. The settlement amount was significant, but the money was not the headline. The record was. For the city, it meant federal monitoring and public accountability. For the department, it meant acknowledgement that the system had failed before it corrected itself. For Bell and Delaney, it meant permanent consequences tied to their decisions, not excuses. At Naval Special Operations Command, Cross was formally briefed on the outcome. His commanding officer addressed him directly. "You acted with restraint under pressure. The evidence did the rest." Cross responded simply, "I wanted the truth documented." It was. Weeks later, Cross traveled again, same uniform, same posture, same quiet professionalism. This time, no one stopped him. No one questioned whether he belonged. Back at Clearwater Airport Police Headquarters, a training bulletin circulated internally. It included a still image from body camera footage. A black service member in dress blues on the terminal floor, officers above him. Beneath it were the words, "This is what failure looks like." No names were printed. They didn't need to be. If this case held your attention, don't watch in silence. Like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to see how power, bias, and accountability collide not in theory but in reality. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?